Kima Yume was a top undercover detective in the bustling city, known for her unmatched ability to blend into any situation seamlessly. She wasn't just good at her job, she was the best. Her reputation was built on solving complex cases that seemed impossible to crack. However, her latest mission felt different from the rest. It was deeply personal and carried risks that extended beyond her professional life. She had solved murders, exposed corruption, and taken down criminals, but this time, her assignment threatened to shatter her carefully built walls. She had to infiltrate the life of Paul Nwosu, a wealthy businessman accused of murdering his partner. This case was not only dangerous but also had the power to turn her world upside down. She had no idea just how much it would change her life forever. Paul Nwosu was a name that resonated in high society. He wasn't just another wealthy businessman, he was a powerhouse whose influence spanned various industries. Alongside his late business partner, Daniel OKWARA, Paul had built an empire that others envied. Their partnership had been hailed as one of the most successful in recent years. But when Daniel was found dead under suspicious circumstances in his upscale apartment, all fingers pointed to Paul. The media frenzy grew, and rumors of betrayal circulated through the elite circles. Paul seemed calm under pressure, but the whispers of his possible involvement couldn't be ignored. The authorities had their eyes on him, but with his wealth and power, it seemed like he would escape justice. However, the police were determined to get to the bottom of the case, and Kima was their best hope. Despite the mounting accusations, Paul managed to stay a step ahead of the law. His vast wealth and connections allowed him to hire the best legal team in the country. They were experts at manipulating the system, ensuring that evidence against him seemed circumstantial at best. Witnesses, who initially appeared ready to testify, suddenly retracted their statements or vanished entirely. It seemed as though Paul had created an impenetrable wall of protection around himself, making it impossible for anyone to touch him. The frustration among law enforcement grew, and the case was at risk of going cold. But the authorities weren't ready to let it slip away just yet. They needed someone who could navigate Paul's world undetected and gather the evidence they needed. That's when Kima was brought in for the undercover operation. Kima's mission seemed straightforward on paper: get close to Paul, discover the truth about Daniel's death, and ensure justice was served. But nothing about this assignment would be easy. To infiltrate Paul's world, Kima had to create a whole new persona. She became Annabelle, a promising fashion designer with a mysterious past. Every detail of her new identity was meticulously crafted. She had to be convincing, charming, and intriguing, someone who would naturally attract Paul's attention. After all, one wrong move could expose her true intentions and put her life in danger. The opportunity came at a charity gala, where she carefully orchestrated an encounter with Paul through mutual acquaintances. He was immediately drawn to her, and just like that, Kima, now Annabelle, entered his life, ready to unravel the truth. Paul Nwosu was everything Kima had been warned about. He exuded confidence, intelligence, and charm, a dangerous combination for anyone trying to get close to him. But there was something more. Beneath the polished exterior, Kima sensed that Paul was guarded, as if he was always calculating his next move. His charm wasn't just a natural trait, it was a weapon he wielded expertly. Despite this, Paul was intrigued by Annabelle's independence and beauty, and soon, he welcomed her into his exclusive world. Kima found herself in the midst of lavish parties, high-stakes business meetings, and intimate dinners with Paul. As time passed, she began to see glimpses of vulnerability in him during private moments, making her question the man she had been sent to investigate. Could this charismatic man really be a cold-blooded killer? As Kima delved deeper into her investigation, she began to uncover details that painted a more complex picture of Paul's life. She meticulously searched through his business records, which revealed some unusual transactions. She also tracked down former employees who had worked with both Paul and Daniel. The information she gathered pointed to a troubling situation. Paul had turned down a potentially lucrative business deal with a new group of partners. His refusal had caused a rift between him and Daniel, who had gone behind Paul's back to strike a deal with these new associates. The deeper Kima dug, the more she realized that these new partners were far from ordinary businessmen. They were dangerous criminals involved in illegal activities that Daniel had unknowingly entangled himself in. The stakes were higher than Kima had initially thought. Daniel's dealings with the new business partners had been far more dangerous than anyone had realized. These men weren't just entrepreneurs, they were criminals who used legitimate businesses as fronts for their illegal operations. Daniel had unwittingly allowed them to use his company's shipping containers to transport illegal drugs and firearms. Once he was involved, there was no easy way out for him. The pressure mounted as Daniel found himself trapped between his business responsibilities and the dangerous world he had unknowingly stepped into. His relationship with Paul became strained as he tried to hide his actions. But eventually, the situation spiraled out of control, and Daniel found himself in over his head. In the end, it wasn't just his business that was at risk, his life was, too. Unfortunately, Daniel's tragic fate was sealed by his own poor decisions. As Kima pieced together the events leading up to Daniel's death, she began to see Paul in a new light. His decision to refuse the deal wasn't out of greed or arrogance, it was driven by fear. Paul had seen the danger from the beginning and had wisely chosen to avoid entangling himself with these criminals. But Daniel's ambition had blinded him to the risks, and it had cost him his life. The more Kima uncovered, the more she realized that Paul wasn't the villain she had been led to believe. In fact, he had tried to protect himself and those close to him from the criminals. Kima was torn between her duty to the investigation and her growing feelings for Paul. Her emotions were becoming entangled with the case, making it harder to see things clearly. Kima had always prided herself on her professionalism, but this time, her emotions were getting in the way. Somewhere along the line, Annabelle had stopped being just a cover identity. Kima had genuinely fallen for Paul, and her feelings for him were no longer just part of the mission. She found herself caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions: love, guilt, fear, and confusion. She knew she couldn't continue living a lie, but she also feared what would happen if Paul discovered the truth about her real identity. The weight of the deception gnawed at her as she struggled to maintain the balance between her responsibilities as a detective and her affection for the man she had been sent to investigate. She knew the time was coming when she would have to confront the truth, no matter the consequences. The night Kima decided to reveal the truth to Paul, she could feel her heart racing. She had never been this nervous before, even in the most dangerous situations. As she stood outside Paul's penthouse, she took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to do could change everything. When Paul opened the door, he greeted her with his usual warmth, but his smile quickly faded when he noticed the serious expression on her face. "Annabelle, what's wrong?" he asked, concerned. It took every ounce of strength for Kima to drop the act and confess. "My name isn't Annabelle," she began, her voice shaky. "I'm Kima Yume, an undercover detective. I was sent to investigate you for Daniel's murder." She watched as Paul's face change, a mixture of shock, hurt, and disbelief washing over him. Paul stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, trying to process the bombshell Kima had just dropped. The room was thick with tension as he searched her eyes for any sign of deception. "So, everything between us was a lie." His voice was quiet, but the pain was clear. Kima's heart sank. "At first, yes," she admitted, struggling to keep her voice steady. "But it's not anymore. I've uncovered the truth, Paul. You didn't kill Daniel. He got involved with dangerous people, and it cost him his life. I'm sorry for deceiving you, but you need to know that I believe in your innocence." Paul's shoulders slumped as he finally sat down, the weight of everything catching up to him. "I tried to warn him," he whispered, his voice filled with sorrow. "But he didn't listen." Kima couldn't bear to see Paul like this. She walked over to him, her heart aching for the man she had come to care for so deeply. Gently, she placed a hand on his shoulder, offering him what little comfort she could. "You're free now, Paul," she said softly. "The truth will clear your name." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and something else she couldn't quite place. In that moment, Kima didn't see the powerful businessman who had been under suspicion for murder. She saw a man who had endured immense loss and was finally on the path to healing. "And what about us?" he asked quietly, his voice barely audible. Kima smiled through her tears, her heart full of hope. "That's up to us to decide. But I think we deserve a chance." Paul's eyes softened as he reached for Kima's hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. There was a vulnerability in his gaze that she hadn't seen before. "Yes," he whispered, his voice barely above a breath. "We do." For the first time in weeks, Kima felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The investigation had been officially closed, with Paul's name cleared of all charges. The truth had been uncovered, and justice had been served. But this wasn't just the end of a case for her, it was the beginning of something new. Kima had made her final report, but she wasn't walking away from Paul or the feelings she had developed for him. Together, they were stepping into a new chapter, one that was filled with hope, love, and the promise of a future built on trust and honesty.